All right, it's 7 o'clock.
It
I say we
is.
do it. I say we do it.
Right,
We got a lot to
right.
talk about. All right.
Yes, we do. Yes.
So I see some people are chiming in here, and I'm glad to see everybody here. It's a beautiful evening. My name is Kristie Goforth Schilling. I thank you for joining us, and I'm here joined with Kalvin Barrett. And we're going to have a really meaningful discussion tonight. I just know it. I'm excited to learn from Kalvin and hear what he has to say, and I hope you are too. We hope you just come with an open mind, willingness to listen and hear what Kalvin's saying. And we definitely want this to be a community discussion. So please feel free to post your questions, and I'm watching on my phone to field those questions as they come in. So just a little bit about me. I am a Monona City Council Alder. I was elected on April 13th. I'm also the executive director of Free Bikes for Kids Madison. And the last 6 years, I ran the Monona Eastside Business Alliance as the executive director. And I'm joined here with Kalvin. And so Kalvin, why don't you tell us a little about you?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kalvin Barrett, and I am excited to be here and excited to share my experiences, my personal and professional experiences with you in the community, as this is a great opportunity for us to have transparency and communication. I am currently an educator at a local college in the criminal justice program. I also teach in the Law Enforcement Academy. I'm the lead defense and arrest tactics instructor. I am currently a part-time law enforcement officer. And I worked at the Sun Prairie Police Department and the Dane County Sheriff's Department before that. So I'm very involved in law enforcement, but I'm also involved in the educational and the training side of it. I think a lot of the opportunities that we're presented with right now, especially me being an educator, is important because education is key and knowledge is key with all of us coming together and understanding each other, even if we have opposing views. I started a business in 2018 called KDB Innovative Consulting, LLC, and I specialize in that business in workplace violence training, active shooter training, and diversity and inclusion. So there's a lot of things that are going on right now, and I'm just excited to be here to talk about my experiences as an African-American man in society, but more importantly, an African-American police officer in this society that's filled with a lot of turmoil right now. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Whatever in the world compelled you to go into law enforcement? I mean, it's not an easy job.
Yes.
How did you get here?
Yes, it definitely is. One of the main reasons I decided to get into law enforcement was my experience growing up in Southern California. My father was a law enforcement officer with the San Diego County Marshal's Department, which is now known as the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. And he died suddenly. And I was able to see at an early age the family and the togetherness and the support of the law enforcement community at that time. I remember being 12 years old and sitting at the funeral, and my mom sitting next to me crying with the folded flag next to her, and all of the police officers that walked past us and shook my hand and hugged my mom or gave me a fist bump or gave my sister a hug. And I noticed the San Francisco Police Department. I noticed all of these agencies from all over the state that came down to pay respects to my father. And I thought that was something that was really special, and that was something that I wanted to be a part of. Also, too, with my father being an African-American man and a police officer in Southern California during the early and mid-90s, I was able to really talk to him and learn a lot from his experiences and things that he faced on duty and off duty. So understanding that there are great officers out there, knowing that it is a difficult job, absolutely, but knowing that he took that responsibility on his shoulders, and I felt that I had to take that same responsibility to show our community and show everyone out there in the world that law enforcement officers do good things, we do a great job, and we care about the people that we are in the community with. So those are some of the basic reasons I got into it. Also, too, I really, really enjoyed just being able to help people. I've always been a helper. Prior to getting into law enforcement, I was a middle school teacher. And so I was constantly helping students in science with homework and other things. And so being able to help people in a time of need is very important. I also wanted to be the person running towards a problem when everybody else is running away. I felt I have that in that fight or flight. I have been blessed with the opportunity to fight. And so when those situations arise, I felt I was given an opportunity to really take advantage, or an opportunity to be able to help people and do what I do best. So it's great. It's a calling, and I'm glad I followed it. And I look forward to continuing to be a law enforcement officer and helping people in our community.
Awesome. What an awesome story. It sounds like it chose you. You didn't choose it.
Yeah.
You were designed for this. So, all right. Well, so I have solicited some questions from the public in advance. So I've got those here in front of me. And so we'll start with some of those until we get some other questions going. Knowing that the Black Lives Matters protests are still going in our community and definitely top of mind for people. I think I'll start with that question. Some people felt that the Black Lives Matter protests were successful, and some felt that the use of force was very concerning. How can we better maintain the peace at a peaceful protest?
Well, that is an outstanding question, and I think it's important for us to really understand and really have the discussion that there is a big difference between protesters and peaceful protesters and rioting. And I think a lot of times people clump those together and think that the peaceful protesters are those that are actually rioting, but in reality, they're not. I was there for numerous peaceful protests with my wife and my two daughters, and it was educational, it was insightful, it was inspiring, and it was just a great coming together of the community for a cause. At no point while I was there did I see anyone break anything, throw any rocks, do anything outside of just being passionate about what they care about, and that's equality. Now, what happened after that was a completely different group than the individuals that I was in contact with. So it's so important that we realize we don't clump them all together and say that peaceful protesters and the rioters or the looters were one. It's the same respect as a police officer. I, as a good officer, don't want to be lumped together with those officers that are making bad decisions. So please, it's so important that we keep that in mind, that we are completely separate entities, and that I'm a good police officer and there are bad police officers that are out there, but also there are peaceful protests that have great meaning and do great things for our community. And then there are those who do riot and that do destruct and break things, completely different. So I think, continue or making sure that we continue to understand and separate those two is the best way to maintain the peace at these peaceful protests.
Absolutely agree with that. To expound on that a little bit, I know some of the protesters were charged with resisting arrest, and they can end up with a criminal record. And I know that even happens to people who resist arrest for crimes they didn't commit. So what are the pros and cons of keeping the charge of resisting arrest as part of the penal code?
Right. So there are definitely pros and cons of keeping resisting arrest in our penal code. And it is exactly what it is. Resisting arrest is when someone's been informed that they are under arrest and they do anything physically to try to prevent that from happening. So they are counteracting the officer's ability to take them in custody and place them under arrest. Now, how that is applied throughout the United States at every single protest, I wouldn't be able to speak on that. But in my experience as a law enforcement officer, as working with other law enforcement officers, especially here in Dane County, the abuse of that is non-existent in my experience. Now, am I naive to say that it never happens? Well, absolutely not. I understand that it happens, but in my experiences as a law enforcement officer, it hasn't. I think some of the negatives to it is that, yes, indeed, the officers can indeed use it to put charges on individuals. Does it happen a lot? Not in my experience, but does it happen? Yes, it's happened in the past. It has happened, and it will continue to happen. But it's on us as officers and as the community to educate ourselves to make sure that we understand when it's a proper application of the charge and when it's a not proper application of the charge.
Absolutely. Okay. I see we've got a great question from Sue, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute. I'm going to ask one more that kind of goes along with the protests. Can we talk a little about the alternative tools that law enforcement uses? And should we be considering taking away less lethal tools like pepper spray, tasers, tire deflation devices, And should police be using canine officers?
Excellent. That is a great question, and I do understand the portion of the community that views that the more tools a police officer has, the more they're going to rely on those tools and rely less on their communication skills and their de-escalation. So I do understand that perspective and that point of view. But the tools that are provided to law enforcement officers are tools to help us do our jobs without using deadly force. All of the tools that are in our toolbox that are provided as law enforcement officers has a purpose. Those purposes have specific operating procedures. They fit specifically into where use of force is used. They have limitations, and understanding that those limitations can really lead to us having to transition into other tools that can be effective. The taser, for example, is something that is very controversial, and it has been since it's been placed into the toolbox of law enforcement officers. It is a non-lethal way for officers to gain control of an individual for up to 5 to 10 seconds. And what that does is it allows officers to gain control of someone without using deadly force or without using excessive force. I would encourage all of our community members watching this to view our tools not as devices of punishment, but of devices of control. And that's exactly what they're referred to as. Pepper spray, which its formal name is oleoresin capsicum, or OC, is another tool that law enforcement officers have that provides a temporary cessation of assaultive behavior. It is an irritant. Once it gets into the eyes, it changes the focus of that individual from the officers to their eyes and the pain that's in their eyes, which allows a window for officers to gain control of an individual and take them into custody safely without using deadly force. And when we take these tools away from officers, that's where we don't have options, and we don't have other options to transition to. So I would be very wary of removing these tools from officers because they do have a place. Can those tools be abused? Absolutely. Are they? In a lot of cases, yes. But for the most part, in my experiences working here in Dane County and in other areas of the state, they are used perfectly. And they're used because it allows us to gain control of a situation without resorting to deadly force. Something like stop sticks is another tool that, when used properly and used under the guidance of very restrictive and specific policies and procedures, can be a great tool to deflate a fleeing vehicle's tires properly and to get the vehicle to come under control safely. So each tool that we have has a purpose, and it's so important that the public and people understand the exact purpose of each one of those. Each one of the tools that we have, again, have specific uses and when we can and when we can't use them, and justification is needed for each and every one of those tools. So I think the tools are very much needed, and if we take away those tools, I think it really limits the amount of options and de-escalation that law enforcement officers have.
And then the last part of that's probably the toughest part is the canine officers.
Yes, right. And it's interesting that sometimes, whether it's the media, whether it's to show cops, a lot of times, we think that canine dogs are there for one purpose, and that's to do what? To bite. But in reality, there are so many different purposes that our canine dogs actually do. So many different things that they do, whether it's tracking individuals that are lost, someone that has been kidnapped, someone that has gone missing, tracking someone that is dangerous to the community. Finding weapons is another use for them. Explosives is another use for our canine dogs. So there's a lot of things that the canine dogs are used for, and it's not necessarily just attacking or biting. Again, it is a tool. Can it be abused? Absolutely. But for the most part, in my experiences, it's been used to the best of our abilities, and it's been used safely.
Okay. Sounds like so much of it comes down to training and just really watching your policies very closely, I would imagine.
Absolutely, absolutely. It really does.
One more quick question that came in, and it goes along training before I get to Sue's question, which I'll do next, is Ronisha asks, how much diversity training is in a basic police curriculum?
Well, that is an outstanding question. And right now in our law enforcement academy, which is 720 hours, we have 8 hours of cultural competence. Yes, 8 hours. In my opinion, I think that should be much higher. And I do not think we're preparing our young officers to go out onto the road and be prepared to deal with people of different socioeconomic statuses, backgrounds, races, ethnicities, and cultures. So whatever percentage that is, I'm assuming it's pretty low. I think that should and will be, I think, in the future be increased quite a bit. But yes, it's very limited, and that's a great question. Thank you.
You know, on Monday night, we had a city council meeting and we contracted with Nehemiah to do a very comprehensive set of work for us in Monona. And one piece of that is reviewing our police training. So I think you're probably going to see a trend of that happening all over the country, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Society's demanding it, and we need to do it.
and it's needed. There's no such thing as having too much training. There's no such thing. You know, as officers, the more training we have, the better we are of understanding, the quicker we can assess the situation, and the better we can make a good, safe decision. And that's so important that we do that. And a lot of times, whether it's scheduling, whether it's cost of overtime, officers don't have the opportunity to get the additional training, things on top of that to prepare them to do their job. And it's understandable from a department standpoint, but I think at this point, our number one goal should be proper training and continuing that training on a daily basis, not once or not 4 times a year.
Education.
Yeah, education.
More and more education.
Yeah.
This is Sue's question. And so this is something that's happening in our community and probably in communities all over the country. Monona Grove is wrestling with the contract with our school resource officers. And she is wondering about your view on the appropriateness of police officers, she says specifically in the high school. But maybe you want to speak about generally in schools.
Yeah, generally. So my perception, my view of law enforcement officers in the school is very unique in that after my father passed away, the school resource officers in the schools that I had played a significant role in my development. I learned a lot from them. I'll never forget Officer Cutler with the San Diego Police Department. And he was the coolest guy. He had the coolest jerry curl. He had the biggest muscles. He could dunk a basketball. He was just someone that we all looked up to and wanted to be around. So my view of exactly what a school resource officer does may be different from individuals that have had negative contacts. And I respect that. I respect that there are different perspectives of what a school resource officer does. But in my experience, in what I've seen here in Sun Prairie as a police officer, as well as I've seen in Madison and other areas, the school resource officers do so much more than just enforce the law in there. It would be that's why they have the title school resource officer, because they do provide a lot of resources. Now, again, are there situations where they have abused their power and inappropriately put their hands on our children? Absolutely. And when that happens, they should be held accountable to the fullest extent and move and kind of go from there. But, you know, my experience of a school resource officer is just a unique perspective. And I'm very happy to share that because I've seen the good. I've seen way more good than I've seen bad with our school resource officers. But at the same time, I respect that opinion and those views and that perspective of people that haven't had the type of positive interactions that I have had. So I definitely understand that. So thank you for that question. Excellent question.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, your personal story. I know my children, they love our school resource officer, but you know, my children are white, and you know, so I also respect that might not be everyone's experience.
Absolutely, gotta respect that.
Yeah, and my children's experience with the police overall has been very positive. And so they've created a great rapport with my children. You know, I would hear my kids come home and they'd have stories about Officer Luke. And I really enjoyed it. And I've gotten to know him a bit and really enjoy him as well. So, all right, let's see. There's some good questions coming in. So someone asked about how about people who are being arrested for resisting arrest. We did touch on that a bit. Okay. How is mental health of candidates for policing explored before someone is hired or admitted to an academy for training? That's coming from Kate.
Kate,
So,
okay, so I'm assuming the question is regards to so like a psychological evaluation of officers.
it sounds like it.
Yes, yes. Well, there's an extensive review, and again, my experience of being hired at 3 law enforcement agencies has all been the same. There's a psychological evaluation that's done. That's very extensive with questions, with sitting down and speaking to someone. You're evaluated, your background is looked at, your decisions are looked at that you've made, your application, and things that you've admitted to and things you haven't admitted to are looked at. So it's a very extensive a process that goes through before an officer is hired at a police department. It's important that everyone understands is that that new officer that's being hired represents that department, not only the department, but the city, as well as law enforcement all throughout this world. So if there's anything that comes up that wouldn't represent us to the fullest or properly, we are not going to take a chance in hiring that individual. Now, should we have continued psychological evaluations as we go through our law enforcement careers? Absolutely. Things change, life changes, people change, sudden, divorce, sudden death, health issues, all of those things that go into it that we should be able to be ensuring that our officers are properly prepared to be on the street, on a yearly, if not, or bi-yearly basis. So absolutely, that should be something that we do a little bit more in detail. And I think with our current, I think that's going to be something that's going to be practiced a little bit more here in our near future. So.
Oh, great. It sure sounds like it. So that was good. Because Dana had asked, and how frequently is this revisited? So thanks for addressing that. Oh, this is a good one too. Colette. Oh, I had all these set questions, but boy, we got some great questions here, Kalvin. So, Colette says, what do you think good police officers can do better to get rid of the bad police officers?
Oh man, that is a great question. And a lot of times, everyone thinks that there's a magic wand to kind of separate the good from the bad. And I think what us good officers can do on a daily basis is take every call one step at a time. A lot of times we think we need to be able to change the world and change the community perception in one day or in one moment. But in reality, it's the marathon of it. It's constantly being there for our community, even sometimes when they don't want us to be there. It's doing the right thing. It's building those relationships. It's taking all of the necessary steps to continue to build and mold those positive relationships with our community. Also, too, we have to be able to point out, identify, and hold accountable those officers that aren't doing that. And understand with our police union and with the officers that I've worked with, we are more than willing to turn in an officer that isn't doing his job, that isn't doing things properly. Why? Because they represent me. Remember, police officers wear a uniform. Uni means one. So what one bad officer does represents all of us. And I can tell you this from my personal and professional experience, there's nothing worse that a good officer dislikes more than a bad officer, because they represent us in a negative light, and that's not okay.
Absolutely. Let's see. When you and I started talking about doing this session, you mentioned the difference between discriminatory practices and discriminatory acts. Can you explain the difference and why that's important?
Yeah, so what comes down to that is what's interesting is when I received my master's degree in criminal justice, it really forced me to think outside of the Dane County bubble of law enforcement, right? It forced me to look at things and read peer-reviewed literature and study empirical data that really challenged what I thought what was normal. And I realized how limited my view of law enforcement was. And it really allowed me to view law enforcement from a grander scale than Dane County. And we are blessed here in Wisconsin with our training, with our accountability measures, with all the things that go into what we do. Other states do not have anywhere close to what we have here in regards to training and preparation for the job that we do. So it's it's important that, you know, when we go through that and we do that, is that man, I lost track. What was the question again? I apologize.
We were talking about discriminatory practices and discriminatory
Discriminatory
acts.
practices and acts,
I'll
right.
keep you on.
So in the
I'll keep you on
process of,
track.
yes, that's all right. You know, things happen, lose track.
Absolutely.
Kids are running around crashing bikes in front of me. It's all right. We're okay. But the discriminatory act. So when I was going through my criminal justice program, I was really understanding and really looking at views from outside of what I thought of as a police officer. And in that, there's a perspective and there's views out there that doesn't put the onus on discriminatory actions of police officers. So what that means is they don't hold account. They don't think it's the fault of the individual officer who is doing discriminatory acts, right? They view it as it's a discriminatory practice or a system as a whole that is allowing that officer to do what he's doing. And that system, that discriminatory action, is different than the intent, in that the action goes towards our culture. It goes towards when we're off duty. It goes towards what we see on the media. It goes towards our movies. It's much bigger than what we see within the individual officer. And I think when we try to blame the individual officer for his discriminatory intent, we really lose focus of the bigger systemic issues that are plaguing our society. And we limit it to that individual officer instead of looking at things on a bigger scale and holding those accountable, which is trickling down to that individual officer.
All right. Can you talk a little about the police pursuing people? You know, I know a lot of people in, say, Monona, Fitchburg, Madison have been impacted by the young children that are stealing cars and going at high speeds. Can you talk a little about that? And please give us
I know it's interesting. I know in regards to police pursuits, it's something that there is a place for it in law enforcement. There's good uses for it, but I think there needs to be specific policies and procedures put in place to ensure that our number one goal when we're pursuing a vehicle is community safety and officer safety. And a lot of times we get so caught up in trying to apprehend someone who's leaving or running from us or driving away that we lose track of that. I've been in several pursuits of my law enforcement career. When you're in a pursuit, it's more scary. It's not like you see on Cops. Everybody thinks it's cool and we watch Bad Boys. It is absolutely terrifying, right? When you're driving at that rate of speed, your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases, my palms started to sweat. I'm going through all of my mental trainings that's teaching me not to get tunnel vision while I'm pursuing that. But also, too, I have to take into consideration not everything that my vehicle does, but every other vehicle that's out there. I have to anticipate the person not paying attention and running that red light. So there's a lot that goes into that. And I understand the perspective that thinks that we need to apprehend these individuals and hold them accountable and arrest them. But I think my ultimate priority is community and officer safety. Statistics show from the CDC that from 2007 to 2016, 460 officers died in the line of duty from crash-related accidents. 460. So we have to be able to put in policies and procedures that ensure that, yes, there are circumstances under which we do need to pursue people, but they need to be very extingent circumstances, and they need to pose a greater risk to the community than us driving through at a high rate of speed. So I definitely think there's a time and a place for it, but it definitely needs to be regulated through our policies and procedures so that we are maintaining community safety as our highest priority.
Okay. You know, I think one of the things I hear often is the phrase, an imminent danger to the public. And so that seems pretty subjective, though. You know, that's different, probably very different for me than it is for you. So how exactly do you have best practices? Do you provide examples in training? How do you define what an imminent danger is?
Right. Well, the imminent danger really depends on the articulation of that officer that's identifying an imminent threat. So again, with our practices and what we do in law enforcement, there's not really a end all be all. There's not specifics or boxes to which everything we do has to fit into. It all depends on the articulation of the officer. And if the officer that is pursuing that vehicle can articulate that the individual poses an imminent threat, well, then that would allow that. I know with pursuit policies in law or with local law enforcement agencies that I've worked for, if there is a vehicle that flees, the first thing the officer is to do is to call it out. Once it calls it out, the shift supervisor then reaches out over the radio to the officer and says, what exactly are you pursuing them for? And if it's something that doesn't pose an imminent threat to the public, the supervisor in most cases will tell you to terminate and turn away and do not pursue that vehicle. An example of that was there was an individual that was stealing stuff from a local retail store we have here. He ended up circling back around after we were trying to find him and got into his vehicle. I pulled up behind the vehicle, activated my full emergency lights, walked up to the side of the vehicle, and he drove away. At no point did I get into my vehicle and chase after him. I called out over the radio to inform my supervisor, my partners, and listening agencies of the description of the vehicle, the license plate of the vehicle, as well as what the crime that they had committed. At that moment, I had to take into consideration it was that bottle of liquor that he just stole worth chasing him at a high rate of speed through the city of Sun Prairie? And the answer was absolutely not. I knew who he was. I had him identified, and sure the heck enough, a week later, we ended up coming in contact with him at court. So there's definitely a time and a place for the pursuit, but we must make sure that they pose an imminent threat, to the public. For example, better example would be an active shooter. Someone is in their vehicle and has a manifesto or is going Facebook Live saying that they're going to take lives in a highly populated area. Well, that absolutely is a situation where you can do that. But again, it really all depends on the articulation of the officer, and we must keep the safety of the community as our number one priority.
All right. You talked a little about petty theft, and so in Monona, we see a lot of petty theft cases. While we're a small city of 8,000 people, we have a lot of big box stores, and it results in a very high number of petty retail theft. So what are your thoughts on use of force for petty theft?
Yes, well, I guess I don't know if it's necessarily use of force, but petty theft is something that, if you look at the reasons that people steal, it varies, right? It could be boredom. It could be necessity, so they need food. It could be, they have an addiction, whether it's a substance addiction, and that's why they're stealing stuff. But understanding the root causes of why people are stealing is, I think, the most important thing. Because once you identify why they're stealing, then maybe you can explore some social issues that could prevent them from stealing in the future. An example. An individual, I remember there was a call I took at a local retail store, and I had a police agency that I worked for, and it was a group of kids that were stealing food on the same day around the same time for about 3 or 4 weeks in a row. So every day on a Thursday, they would come in, they would steal food, sodas, drinks, snacks, candy, things kids steal. So after about the 3rd or 4th week, they called me. I came in and ended up making contact with the kids and his family. Come to find out, the kids that were stealing the food and the snacks were hungry, and they didn't have food in their house. Now, the approach I could have taken was write them a ticket to their mom, who, if she couldn't afford food, she sure as heck wasn't going to be able to afford the ticket, right? And then I can handcuff, take them to jail, do all these things from a reactionary law enforcement standpoint. Instead, I identified the root cause of the crime, which was a social issue. And I got them in contact with the local food pantry that I sit on the executive board for. So now the family no longer had to steal for food. And I think that's where we need to into more not the reactionary punishment of law enforcement, but the proactive side of things that will help us understand the root causes of the crime. An example, in Monona, if you guys, let's say, had 100 in a year, 100 retail thefts from Walmart, and you were able to reduce that by 15%, 15% would be 15 calls. 15 incident calls, retail theft calls could take about an hour for the officer to do from start to finish. Think about all the good that those officers could do with 15 additional hours of community time instead of taking care of it. So I think that is something that needs to be looked into. From a study standpoint, I think it would be good to really look and analyze the age of the individual stealing, the time of day, the time of the year, what they're taking, and all of those things help us have a better understanding of identifying the root causes of those crimes so that we can address the social side. Now, again, there are individuals out there that just like to steal stuff to steal, absolutely. But I think the greater majority of people that are stealing stuff, for the most part, is not necessary.
Okay, so just so you know, Kalvin, your sound cut out there. Just I could hear you. You were talking about, helping kids get the resources for the food pantry and stuff. So, but your sound did cut out there just for a minute, just so we know. So I'll keep it.
Okay,
posted.
can you hear me now?
I can hear you fine. So I think it's okay now. Sounds like it's back. Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Let's see. I think a lot of people are talking about the crisis intervention teams and utilizing the unarmed professionals that are trained in, say, behavioral health, mental health, domestic abuse, all the different hats that we've put on our police officers to wear that they don't necessarily have extensive training in. Do police officers embrace this idea?
I can't speak for every law enforcement officer out there, but from me and my perspective, I embrace this 150%. As a police officer, I'm asked to do so many things as a community service officer. I'm asked to be a big brother, a big sister, a marriage counselor, a law enforcement officer, a traffic director. I'm asked to do so many things. And one of those things that what we do is being a mental health professional. And as much as I love what I do as a job, I am not properly prepared as a police officer to handle a 12-year-old who has mental illness and that's going through an outbreak. I'm not prepared to do that, nor has my training prepared me to do that. So I think if we take things off of the plates of law enforcement officers that we're not properly prepared to do, I think for the most part, most officers would love to do that. Because we do feel sometimes we go into situations and we're not properly prepared or trained to deal with that, especially in mental health calls. So I would personally be 150% for those unarmed mental health crisis teams to come in, because that is what they do and they're good at that. And any way that I could support them, I would do that to the fullest extent. So yes, I do support that, absolutely.
Awesome. That's going to kind of tie into a budget question. I see a question here from Ronisha on it, and then I had a budget question as well. Let me see where that was. Well, I don't know where it was specifically, but is there a way that we can, well, in Monona we struggle, one thing we really struggle with is hiring a diverse set of officers. I know I've personally tried to recruit people of color, people from the LGBTQ community when I see openings here for our police department. And I always get the same response. You know what, Kristie, I wish I could. I would love to work in Monona, but I'm working in Madison because it pays more. And so so is there a way that we can increase our diversity on our force without increasing the police budget? And to get to, Ronisha had kind of another little part on that was, why do police budgets continually increase, but the police officer income remains stagnant a lot of times? Can you describe a little about where the budget goes and how that works?
Yeah, so that is an excellent point where we see that the budgets go up all the time, and really the police officers' budget's not really going up. And I think, from a budget standpoint, I mean, if the individual's sole purpose is, money, then I don't think you can change that without increasing the budget and paying more. You really have to find the candidates that are out there that are doing it not for the money, but for their ability to help their community. And finding those individuals is what's difficult. I left the Dane County Sheriff's Department to come to the Sun Prairie Police Department, and I made less money. but I did it because I knew my influence and my effect on my community would be greater. Now, I'm very fortunate where I didn't have to, or that the salary wasn't a significant part of my decision. And I know everyone's not able to do that, but I think it's finding, identifying what exactly is what an applicant wants, and provide that. I think you at Monona guys have a fantastic city. You have a fantastic location. You have fantastic residents. And in that is what should make an officer want to work there. Matter of fact, I know one of your newest officers chose Monona over another larger agency here in Dane County, right? Because he felt a connection to the officers there. He felt a connection to the community. He felt that he would have a greater impact on the Monona community than the other community at a larger agency that I know paid more was. And that's the most important part, because that young officer that you have will be with you guys for a very long time, because he's not dependent on the money. He's doing it because he wants to do it and because he cares about the community. So yes, that is, you know, it's very difficult. I know recruiting is very difficult right now. The applicants for police applicants numbers are down, and agencies are really scrambling around to try to find the top echelon of applicants that are out there. Even more so, the smaller agencies are now starting to pay for officers to go through the law enforcement academy, which when I went through in 2009, not a lot of smaller agencies wanted to invest in an officer that much money at that time. So the times are starting to change, and departments are starting to realize that finding a good candidate is very difficult, and they're starting to find new and innovative ways in order to make sure that they identify and qualify and attract the best talent that's out there.
You know, that kind of goes into, you know, we've had a discussion here in Monona, and you and I have discussed this about accredited police departments and non-accredited. Can you explain that a little bit and talk about pros and cons of each?
Yeah, well, the accreditation process is one that's the rigor is very high. It's very difficult, and it requires a lot. I did a little bit of research on it and realized that it is a very difficult process, but the pros of that outweigh the cons, right? It's not that expensive per se, but it also allows law enforcement agencies to be on par with the state, with other agencies in regards to their policies, their procedures, and how they do things. Their standard operating procedures at their agency. And it's an ongoing process. And once these agencies go through it, it really is a badge of honor. If you go to the website here with the state of Wisconsin, they have all of the departments that have received the initial level of accreditation, and then they have the list of all of the agencies that have obtained the highest level of accreditation. But I think it's something that's very important. It requires a lot of time, it requires a lot of effort, but I think in the long run, it's worth it. Studies have shown it reduces the risk of lawsuits from a civil standpoint once departments are accredited, and that's because they do have standard operating procedures that are very, very tested and that are on par with everything else in the state. So it is something that I would recommend most agencies do if they have not done that already.
Are most agencies non-accredited, or can you say that necessarily?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, the numbers, there was a good, especially here in Dane County, there was a good number from what I saw, what I recall seeing of agencies that were accredited, but it was a good number. I can't remember specifically what it was, but for the most part, the larger agencies were definitely accredited.
Okay, and then there's another comment here that kind of maybe accreditation, does that also increase training with school resource officers, say specifically with teenage mental health issues?
Oh, that is a great question. Yes, and I wish I knew. I don't know specifically what that entails. I do know there are two different levels of the accreditation, and both levels require, or the highest level requires much more than the initial level. So I think that would be something that would be outstanding if that was the process. But I wish I knew the answer to that question, but I don't. But excellent question.
Yeah, all right. So of the recommended reforms we're hearing a lot about right now, which ones, I'm going to read some off, and which ones can create the most meaningful reform? Increased funding for social services or behavioral health calls, banning chokeholds, duty to intervene, de-escalation training, response to resistance, information sharing about past misconduct of police officers, like a database, independent prosecution of police officers, and qualified immunity.
Wow, love that list, which is a good
Big
list.
list.
Yes, that's a big list, but I think some of the ones that are just that really could create the most meaningful reform would be the increasing funding for social services and behavioral health calls. I'm assuming a lot of the use of force calls or incidents that we have as law enforcement officers come when we're dealing, well, mostly the most popular ones come when we're dealing with somebody that's going through mental health crisis. And I think if we have trained professionals there on site that know how to handle the situation better, that would be a great step towards limiting or reducing the number of use of force incidents that an agency has. Banning chokeholds, absolutely. Most people, if you don't know, chokeholds are not legal in the state of Wisconsin, nor since I've been a police officer have they been allowed. We don't train it in the academy. We don't train anything that restricts the neck whatsoever. And we emphasize that very much so in our academy. There are certain exigent circumstances that will require that to happen, but that is not trained like we see that in other states. It's not a trained technique like we see. Duty to intervene is another big one. Like I said, here in Wisconsin, we have great training that other places and other states don't have. We have what's called contact officer override. We have shared responsibility, right, which is in our training and is mandated that we share the responsibility of the outcome of a call, both good and bad. If it goes good and we walk the ducks across the street and everybody cheers and it's on social media, good for the officers. But if it goes bad, it represents every officer there is responsible with that or shares that responsibility. We also have what's called contact officer override, which mandates that an officer, if he views any sort of the excessive force or any illegal activity, he is mandated to intervene verbally and physically if needed. And that is trained in our academies through professional communications portion of our academy, but also in our defense and arrest tactics section of the academy. So these are all things that we've been practicing in law enforcement and we have in place to prevent incidents like what's happened in New York and what's happened in Minneapolis. So again, we receive fantastic training here in Wisconsin, and we are really ahead of the curve with a lot of the stuff that we do. I think de-escalation training is another fantastic way that will really help with criminal justice reform. The de-escalation allows officers more time for resources to arrive, for him to assess the situation more, and to make a better decision. Again, and so that de-escalation is just a great opportunity for officers really to have more time to reassess a situation before they decide to use force. And I think information sharing about past misconduct of police officers is important too. There needs to be a database, right? If we're going to say as a law enforcement agency, we good cops don't like those bad cops, well, then we need to have a list of those bad cops so we can point out who those bad cops are. And I think that is one of the biggest things in reform that we should have, that should be implemented absolutely tomorrow. And that not includes the excessive force, but being terminated for reasons that would be questioned or being forced to resign is another one. So I think that is very important and something that we should be implementing. And as I say, with things that are going on in our current society, I see it being happening pretty soon.
Awesome. Excellent. Did you want to talk, the last ones were the qualified immunity piece. Did you want to talk a little about that? I think, yeah. What do you say about that?
Yeah, so qualified immunity, I think that, like I said, education and understanding is very important. And a lot of times, it's perceived that officers receive qualified immunity even in criminal cases. And it's important that qualified immunity only applies to civil cases. So if someone is trying to sue the officer personally, If the officer commits crimes and is arrested, they do not have access to qualified immunity. So I think that's very important to understand that sometimes it is believed that officers can be arrested for committing crimes and then claim qualified immunity. But it's important to know that that only applies to civil cases. So if you're trying to take somebody to court civilly to sue them for money, that's when it applies, not necessarily the criminal aspects of it. So that is a great question too, and a great topic. Thank you.
That's a great thing to let us know about, because it is something we hear about a lot. I think we're in an era where just everything, we're so polarized, and even just the discussion of police reform causes, it seems, one half of the population to dig their feet in and just say no, like this is a binary choice. I either support Black lives or I support the police, and we, it's something, I hope we can all just take a deep breath, take a step toward the middle just a little, because we've got to be able to solve these problems together. I think someone talked a little about someone sent me this question about police culture and what can be done within police departments and the culture to help alleviate tensions. We see officers who law enforcement is under a microscope, and they're feeling very vilified, and they're taking it personally because their industry is under this microscope. What can you talk a little about that, and just the culture and how that's affecting officers? I'm just curious about that right now.
Right. I think that the number one way to really change the culture and really to do that in law enforcement is diversity and inclusion. And I don't mean diversity not only in physical characteristics, but also a diversity of thought. And a lot of times we all tend to think the same, we eat the same, we drive the same as officers, and we rarely ever hear the perspective of someone else. And that's hard. And I've gone through that as a police officer, where I was challenged during my master's studies in what I thought was normal. And once you understand and learn those different perspectives, you get a better understanding of things that are happening. If you're at a police department, 100% of your officers are white, and you have no one there to say, hey, Black lives do matter. Why? Because I'm Black. Why? Because my husband's Black. Why? Because my wife is Black. Why? Because my godchildren are Black. If you don't have that diversity of thought and mind coming into those discussions, then you get a lot of the like-minded and the like-minded culture in there. And that's why it's so important that we diversify our law enforcement agencies. And I'm not talking about hiring officers on the lower level, right? I think a lot of agencies fall into that trap where they fall into recruitment and they don't focus on retention. A lot of agencies hire minority candidate or minority officers, but then they keep them in low-level positions. They don't get them in higher positions of an upper administrative positions where they have an influence on hiring, where they have an influence on termination, where they have an influence on policies or procedures and work rules. What you, Kristie, may see as not racist, I may look at that same situation and be like, oh no, that's racist. Why? Because of my personal experiences as an African-American man in America. So those are where the diversity of thought and ideas needs to come in so that we can really change that culture. And when that happens, it's a beautiful thing. And I think it's very important that we really emphasize that and get people of color and women and people from the LGBT community and levels of influence where their thoughts and their philosophies are trickling down to those new officers are coming in. So I think absolutely that is something. That's what I left the Sun Prairie Police Department in my prime. I mean, I loved being a police officer. I loved the community aspect of it. I loved the people. I loved the citizens. I loved my coworkers. But I realized that my level of influence was limited to the city of Sun Prairie. And for me to have a greater influence on our community and on our law enforcement officers was to be in a position where I'm teaching criminal justice classes at the associate degree level, but also I'm training officers in the use of force in our law enforcement academies. So having that level of influence and passing along all of my experiences is really the best way to change that culture. Now, I'm definitely interested in additional ways to get up to a higher level of influence, where now my roots of influence are not just to criminal justice students, but on a higher level where I'm affecting agencies as a whole or doing something more on a grander scale. So that's kind of the, the motivations and things that I think can really be successful in changing the culture of law enforcement.
Yeah, it's happening in corporations across the country too. People are questioning where are your people of color in the leadership roles. We're seeing it all over every industry in our country. I'm going to turn the heat up just a little. There's a comment here, and I'm going to just throw it out to you, and you can say whatever you have, say whatever you want about it. It says, with all due respect to your guest, the boys' club still exists.
Oh man, that trust me, that is not something that I take offense to. I think I embrace these questions. I embrace these opportunities to communicate. And when you talk about the boys club, what it really comes down to is me focusing on what I can control. And that's me and the people that I train on a daily basis. And every industry has their own little clubs. Every industry has their own little tight-knit groups. Every industry has their sororities or fraternities of individuals. The key is if we put people of different perspectives and diverse thoughts and ideas and ethnicities and cultures in those positions, we can change them. And when we do that is when we hire women. We don't just hire someone that has a military background. We hire that single mother that was living on the streets at 18 or 19. We do that when we hire someone that has a very diverse background or came from someplace outside of what a typical pre-law enforcement background would be. So absolutely, yes, there's some involvement with that, but it is my job to change that and to really alter that and really bring to it a new spin on it, which is good, solid, caring police work. And I think a good start to that is that we start to refer to our law enforcement officers as community service officers. Because I think when you refer to someone as a law enforcement officer, the emphasis from the community and the emphasis of the title is on law enforcement. But in reality, we do way more than law enforcement.
Yeah,
we are more community service officers. Yeah. And so I would hate to just, I would hate to just say my title is only one aspect of my job. And I think that helps both sides. Me as a community service officer, I now know with that title that I'm a community service officer, not a law enforcement officer, but also the expectation from the community is of a community service officer and not law enforcement. So again, excellent question. I welcome that. And I think it really took a lot for you to send that question, but I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. That's a great answer. I think, okay, this is one someone asked me today. They asked me specifically what I am doing as a city council member about our gun violence that we're seeing in our community. We're seeing it in Monona and Madison. I'm sure we're seeing it everywhere, right? We had a really, scary incident on the south end of Monona where a house was, riddled with bullet holes, and a child in my son's class, his house was hit. And it's really scary, but boy, we live in a country that has 350 million guns. We have more guns than people. What can we do? What are police doing about that? And how are the police keeping us safer?
Right, excellent. And that it comes down to a lot of times people think it's all guns that officers are worried about. And they think it's the legal carrying concealed weapon individuals that have licenses that we're worried about. And that's not the case. We're worried about the guns that are in the hands of people that are using them for illegal activity. And that is and the way to combat that, number one, is to reduce the amount of guns that are out there. We also need to ensure that people that legally do own guns secure them properly in locked vehicles, have them locked up and disassembled, but also in our homes as well. So there's a lot that we can do as a whole to really limit the amount of gun violence that's out there. Now, dealing with the gun violence and identifying why it's happening, well, that's a whole nother hour discussion and data and breakdown and reflection. So, but it's a great question and it's a good understanding. And there's just so many guns that are out there and they're so available. And if we can control the amount of illegal guns that are out there, then we can definitely try to curb that tendency for people to use use violence with those weapons.
All right. So the individual who posted the comment, is talking about the boys club. He has a good follow-up too. So
Yes.
He says, Kalvin is an extraordinary example of the best of the best. So I just wanted to let you know, you've won him over.
Thank you.
But he's asking, like, do you believe that we can attract better people to the profession with everything that's going on right now?
Man, I don't know who this person is, but I need to meet. I mean, that is an excellent question too. And the studies are showing, right? The studies are showing that based off of the negative attention that law enforcement officers are getting, it's just not as attractive as it once used to be. We have good officers leaving policing to go, into computers or to go into manufacturing or to marketing. There's better ways to make $60,000 a year, and it comes with a lot of scrutiny, and it's difficult. But I think the ones that we do have in here are the best, and the ones that want to do it for less money are the ones that we want here, because it is a difficult job. It's difficult for me to be a Black man in society and be a Black police officer. It is difficult. And there's a burden that I bear, but I wear that burden proudly. Why? Because I know there's someone looking at me right now that's going to view this video, that's going to view this YouTube post, that's going to see me in a police car, that's going to see a post of me playing catch with kids that says, I want to be like him. And that's the people that we want that are going to put in. And that's the person that's willing to go to school and get their education and go to school during the day and work all night and stay and get their bachelor's degree and their master's degree and stay in physical shape to be a police officer. So yes, we are seeing the numbers on a decline, but the officers that we're hiring are good ones. And I know they are because I'm training them all over the past multiple years. So just know you here in Dane County are in good hands because we are putting outstanding officers out on the street. So thank you again for that question.
Oh, that's so fantastic. So we're already at 8 o'clock. It's amazing how fast an hour can go, isn't it?
Yes, it does.
I think these questions are primarily wrapped up on Facebook. I think that's kind of all I've got. Do you have anything else you would like to add, Kalvin?
Yes. On a lighter note, man, I wish I wouldn't wear this wool jacket, man. I am sweating. Oh my goodness! I wore this wool jacket in this collared shirt. I should have set up AC. So it's just the big guy problems that I have when I sweat. But no, it's a little warm. But no, I think I thank everyone for tuning in and everyone that's watching it now and everyone that's going to watch. I think this type of communication and this type of interaction is what's needed. It's important for you guys to see the face of the everyday officer, the good officer that's going out there and grinding and protecting you. It's good to hear my stories, my experiences, and so that you can kind of see exactly who I am and what I represent. There are great officers that are out there. I've worked with them. I'm friends with them. I see them on a daily basis. And from the words, what I would like to end with is from the words of someone that I look up to as a mentor and somebody that I really would love to have my career be just like, and that's former Madison Police Department or Police Chief Noble Ray, stated in a recent article in Umoja magazine that we should never start with the premise of all. So thank you guys again so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Oh, so excellent. You're an inspiration, and I applaud and support all of our officers who operate with integrity and honesty and humanity like you do. It's obviously a very hard job. It's got to be a calling. It's got to be one that chooses you, because I can't imagine why anyone would do it. But I feel really optimistic about kind of this transformational moment we're in, and to see reform. So these historic inequities that are in the system can work, can be shaken out, and it's a more just system for everybody. So I'm optimistic, and I'm even, I'm so much more optimistic after having this session and talking with you. So I thank you for providing that optimism. And, you know, there have been a couple really positive stories that have come out in the news lately. There was one, I think today or yesterday, about the officer who saved the 3-month-old baby from choking.
Absolutely.
You know, so,
Absolutely.
you know,
Yes.
he's probably great at holding an infant, you know, so, these skills that you're constantly building on. So, you know, just watch for the positive moments, and they're out there. They just tend to get flooded by the negatives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I thank you so much. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm waiting for someone to start a newspaper that's all positive stuff about what's happening in our community. So I think that would be a great start, and some stuff out there. But again, thank you so much for this opportunity. It really took a lot for you to do this, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to represent our community and my profession. So thank you.
Well, it's great to hear your voice on this topic, and thank you to everybody who joined and asked the great questions. Really appreciate it.
Right. Thank you again. Have a good night.
Yeah. Have a great evening. Night.